Have you ever seen a person stripped of something they paid for, simply because their appearance didn't fit someone else's standards? Malik Hart, a successful black CEO, has had that exact moment, asked to leave his first-class seat in front of dozens of people. Not because of a mechanical issue, not because of safety concerns, just because a familiar white passenger wanted to sit there. In that moment, he had two choices: to remain silent and avoid trouble, or to step forward with the calm of a man who would not let his dignity be compromised. If it were you, in a moment of being looked down upon even though you did the right thing, what would you choose? And deeper still, do you dare to? If this opening touches something for you, please like, share, and subscribe to join the emotional journey that follows. In the moment of silence that seemed to have been muted by someone, the voice of the black man standing in the middle of the first-class aisle rang out clear, cold, and strangely calm. All of you are suspended. Immediately. No one in Liberty Air Flight 227 understood what was happening. They just looked at him standing there, tall, straight-shouldered, his dark gray suit slightly creased from the long flight. His face was not angry, nor was he shaking. But his eyes, those eyes, made the cabin freeze, cold, deep, and heavy, as if behind them was something too great for mere mortals to comprehend. The boy, around 10 years old in the business class, tilted his head to look at his father, his eyes filled with curiosity but absolutely silent. No one moved. No one dared to say anything. Not a cough. Only the fan in the cabin of the plane parked on the tarmac at Denver International Airport remained running, emitting a steady sound. The man, Dr. Malik Hart, stood up straight, took a deep breath. He did not like this scene. He did not like to scare people. He had never liked to wield power in a way that would make others bow, but he knew, too well, that this moment was not his moment, and what happened here was something he couldn't let alone. At the back of the cabin, Captain Harper Lane, the flight's captain, stood frozen. His eyes showed shock, but also a hint of cornered anger. Next to him was the chief flight attendant, a blonde woman in her 40s, pale but trying to maintain a professional composure. Malik looked at them. There was no hatred in his eyes, only weariness and a disappointment so deep it stung. An old question echoed in his mind, one he thought. A passenger whispered, "Who is he?" Another person replied softly, "I don't know, but he doesn't look like the type of person who wants to cause trouble." Then a man's voice came from behind. He must be someone very high up. But Malik didn't mind. He felt only one thing: the heavy silence of a place where people should be respected equally. In this moment, the coldness in his eyes was not for them, but for the bitter truth that had just happened a few hours earlier. The truth they in this compartment had not heard, did not know, but was about to face directly. Malik closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if to catch his breath. He could hear his own heartbeat, the excitement mixed with a secret pain. He remembered the averted glances from the other passengers, not because they sympathized, but because they were afraid. Those things lay dormant in his memory, until the moment he was forced to repeat the sentence he never thought he would have to say in his life: "I left my chair," under protest. He didn't say it for drama. He said it now, standing before the tense crew. Malik felt something strange. His calm was not that of a winner, but of one accustomed to suffering. A sense of calm that comes from so many years, so many times facing the same kind of injustice, just in different forms. He opened his eyes. The light from the compartment fell on his face, half light, half dark, like the emotions he was feeling. "You are suspended," he repeated again, more slowly, more clearly. "Not because I am angry, but because this must be looked into." A heavy breath escaped from someone in the compartment, either from emotion or confusion. It was unclear. Captain Harper took a step forward, about to say something, but, as he opened his mouth, He saw Malik's eyes, and Harper froze, not because of fear of power, but because those eyes had no— And it was that feeling, the feeling of a man carrying the pain of millions like him, that made the plane cabin so— The strangest thing was, no one dared to approach him to ask him anything. No one objected. No one defended him. They just looked, as if they were witnessing something their hearts knew was right, but their minds couldn't quite keep up. Malik turned toward the exit. His footsteps echoed clearly and evenly, like the rhythm of someone accustomed to walking through the weariness of life. He paused for a second, didn't turn around, just spoke softly. But clearly, this is just the beginning. And he walked away. The whole cabin stood still as a statue. No one knew that behind those words was a much bigger story, a story that began with silence and would end with— People walked back and forth, dragging suitcases with them, a calm contrast to the first-class cabin that had just witnessed a moment of frozen silence. Malik paused for a moment. There was a heaviness inside him that was hard to describe. Not the heaviness of anger, but the heaviness of someone who had lived long enough to know that sometimes what wears the heart down the most is not the insult, but its repetition. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. His hands were still tense from the grip he had had in the cabin, as if he had not yet come to terms with having been forced to stand up that way. He did not want authority to cloud people's hearts. He only wanted the truth to be seen. An airport employee greeted him with a friendly smile. He continued down the hallway, past the glass doors overlooking the security area. The lines were orderly. They all looked the same as they had to remove their shoes, pick up their trays, and pass their items through the scanner. It always made Malik feel that people weren't as different as they thought. But where he had been, just a few minutes before, he had been made to feel that some people were always considered different in the most unacceptable ways. A familiar question echoed in his mind. Why do such gazes still exist, after all these years? But he did not allow himself to be overwhelmed by that question. Not yet. Another matter lay ahead. He slowed his pace as he reached the transition area. His grandmother, Elaine Hart— Malik remembered what she had said once, when he was barely taller than a table. She had told him he couldn't choose how others looked at him, but he could choose how he carried himself. Then she placed her thin but warm hand on his back and gently pushed it straight, as if to say that a black child's back had as much right to be straight as anyone else's. The thought, which had been a dormant memory, resurfaced as he walked into the waiting area. What he had just experienced was no different from what she had prepared him for as a child. The only difference was that he was now the CEO of Heart Shield Technologies, a company that helped protect America's cybersecurity. But no matter where you stand, a few people glanced at him, not because they recognized him, but because the calmness of his face was easier to notice than to ignore. Part of him wanted to let it go, not because he was afraid, but because he was used to the idea that successful people learn to let go. But what happened on Liberty Air 227 wasn't just his business. The way they pushed him aside, the way they used their power to cover up wrongdoing, the way they believed no one would stand up and say anything, all of it went far beyond a chair. He asked himself, if he remained silent, would a man like him, but with less power, be pushed away even more easily tomorrow? A seemingly small question, but enough to make him see clearly that silence this time was something he could not choose. His phone buzzed. The screen displayed a message. He typed back briefly, "I'm fine. But I need to clarify something." He put down the phone, put his hands on his knees, and leaned forward slightly. A feeling so old but familiar came back to him, like the day he sat in his college dorm room, trying to contain his anger after a professor doubted his true abilities. Malik had stayed up until 2 a.m. that day, writing down the biggest question of his life. How can I make people not look down on me because of who I am? His grandmother was silent for a long time before saying that the question could not be answered in a day, nor even by success alone. She said the answer lay in how he stood up when he was put down, and how he helped others stand up as well. Malik felt his spine tighten. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. His legs felt heavy but steady, because what awaited him was not revenge, but the fulfillment of a promise he had made since childhood to never let anyone take away his dignity. Passing the large mirror in the hallway, Malik didn't see the image of a proud CEO. He saw a man trying to prevent the past from repeating itself in the future of others. He walked toward the baggage claim area. The story had just opened up a new path, and he knew he couldn't turn back. This is not the end. This is just the calm before another. Stronger storm is coming. The moment Malik stepped out of the baggage claim area, he felt like he was walking. Some were dragging their suitcases to catch their connecting flights. Others were holding hot cups of coffee tightly like little saviors in the hustle and bustle of life. Those images made Malik feel like a small dot in a myriad of faces. But at the same time, they also reminded him of the reason he had chosen to live a simple life for so many years. His phone buzzed. It was a calendar reminder for a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C., a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity contract that could change the course of HeartShield. Malik stared at the notification for a few seconds longer than he should have. The unrealistically large numbers were nothing compared to what he had. It was unclear whether it was fatigue or calm, but only those who had experienced it could understand. Malik stood before the glass, not adjusting his collar as usual, just looking at himself. He knew Washington was waiting. He knew that there were powerful people up ahead who wanted to hear him talk about the future of the nation's cybersecurity, but there was something else in his heart that wanted to be resolved first. A group of Liberty Air employees walked by. They were in neat uniforms, their movements brisk. Malik didn't look at them, but one of them looked at him with a look of recognition. The person turned away immediately. That little detail rang in Malik's mind like a familiar signal. He had seen, but out of a sense of being burdened with something old, he thought he had long since overcome. As he pondered, the memory of their meeting in New York that morning resurfaced. The check-in clerk recognized him. She happily congratulated him on the impending deal. But then the older colleague standing next to him looked at him warily. It was as if he was assessing whether a well-dressed black man really belonged in the posh area behind the counter. Malik didn't react. He was used to it, but it was those little fragments of sensation that, when touched together, created a simmering something that would explode when pushed to the limit. He wondered how many times he had let such situations pass, just to avoid getting tired. The sound of a suitcase pulling. He stood up, pulling his lightweight suitcase with him, and left the waiting area. Up ahead were the large doors that led to the taxi area. Malik slowed as a group of passengers from another flight filed in. He was caught in the stream for a few seconds. No one in the crowd knew he had just been mistreated. No one knew he was about to sign the most important contract of the year. No one looked at him like he was causing trouble. No one looked at him with judgmental eyes, assessing his position. The feeling was both pleasant and bitter. Malik saw one thing clearly when people were immersed in a crowd: they became themselves. But as soon as they stepped into a space labeled as special, like first class, Malik stared out at them for a moment, letting his mind drift along the lines. Moments like these often helped him answer his hardest questions. He suddenly remembered what Marcus had said a few weeks ago. People are afraid to stand up because they don't think they're strong enough. The words rang in his head like a soft knock. Malik understood why today's events had troubled him so much, because if he kept quiet, he would be allowing this to happen to people who didn't have the same resources or voice as he did. A janitor walked by, pulling a small cart. Her face looked tired from long hours. Malik watched, his heart softening. People like her were the foundation of this country. People like her had been treated unfairly. Malik knew this too well. This time, it was a text from Marcus. "Are you still going straight to Washington?" Malik stared at the message longer than usual. There was a great expectation behind the question, a plan the entire company had been preparing for months. But in Malik's heart, intuition spoke louder than any plan he had to get to the bottom of what happened on Liberty Air Flight 227. He closed his eyes for a few seconds to confirm his decision. When he opened them again, his gaze was sharp and steady. It was a familiar feeling stepping into times where others did not dare. Malik replied to the message, "Change of plans. I will take care of what needs to be taken care of first." He put away his phone and pulled the suitcase firmly. The suitcase rolled, but the real journey had just begun, the moment he was pushed out of seat 1A. As Malik boarded the next flight to Washington, he felt both a little better and a little more uneasy. The airport was still bright, still crowded, still bustling with hurried lives, but something was forming inside Malik, like a vague shadow. He followed the stream of people to the Liberty Air gate, his hand lightly touching the edge of his ticket as if checking to see if it was still in his sleeve. He watched a couple fight over who should hold the boarding pass. A young couple laughed and talked excitedly about their upcoming trip. These moments felt so real. They made Malik feel that the chaos of the world wasn't always on display. Sometimes it was still the window seat, his favorite because it gave him a private view of the open sky. He touched the head of the seat and nodded slightly, as if greeting an old friend. Malik set his suitcase on the rack, hung his coat on the hook next to the footstool, and sat down. He leaned back slightly to adjust the angle of his back, letting his body relax. His hands rested on his thighs, relaxed from the long stretch of tension. Before he could take a second breath, a short but sharp sound reached his ears. It was not the sound of an engine, but the purposeful clearing of a throat as someone approached. Malik looked up. Before him stood a gray-haired man in his late 50s, stocky, wearing a the kind of smile that wasn't directed at Malik, but at his sense of self. "It seems you're sitting in the wrong seat." His voice was loud enough for the person sitting nearby to hear. Malik kept his eyes calm. "Sorry, this is the seat I reserved." Senator Whitford glanced down at his ticket, then back up at Malik. "1A is my seat every week. I fly this route all the time. The staff here knows me." His tone was not a question, but a statement of ownership. Malik did not react immediately. He looked around to make sure he had not made a mistake. The ticket was still clearly marked. He simply said, "My ticket is here." Whitford raised his eyebrows. The thick, hard brows gave off a slightly but behind that gaze, there was something unbalanced, a little wary, almost waiting for an opportunity to show itself. Harper glanced at Malik, then back at Whitford. It was only for a split second, but Malik noticed the change in his gaze. Harper looked at Whitford first. He sensed it before the first word was spoken. "Mr. Whitford. We apologize for the inconvenience." Harper turned to Malik. "There must be a system error. We need you to move to another row." Malik held up the ticket, gently but firmly. "I booked 1A yesterday." Harper smiled politely, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "We understand, but Mr. Whitford is a priority passenger. We'll give you another seat, seat 23B. A woman looked at Malik and then quickly looked away, avoiding eye contact lest she get dragged into any trouble. Malik leaned back in his chair, breathing slowly. He tried to keep his voice soft. "I paid for this seat. It would be inappropriate to move me to a regular seat without reason." Harper straightened, his voice hard. "You're making the whole flight difficult." Hearing that, Malik felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard that tone many times in his life. It was not a reminder. It was more like a warning that he was standing too close to the line that society had set for people like him. Senator Whitford folded his arms and shrugged his shoulders in annoyance. No need to be a bother. I have an important, but another, deeper part refused to accept that he would continue to be pushed aside because someone thought they were more worthy than he. "I'm not causing any trouble," he replied in a small but clear voice. "I'm just staying where I paid to stay." Harper tensed, turning to signal the two airport security guards standing near the cabin door. Even the small movement made Malik's pulse slow, not because he was afraid of what they would do, but because he knew what could happen if he made the wrong move. Two men approached. One had his hand near his waist, as if to reach for his tools if needed. The sense of danger was slight but clear. A little girl's voice came from behind, hesitant. "Mom, why are they talking to him like that?" "Finally," he said slowly. "I don't agree, but if I have to leave my chair because you are using security forces, I will leave. Under my objection." He stood up, his hands on his suitcase as if to retain some dignity in this situation. At that moment, no one in the cabin knew that a small event, starting with a seat change, would open a chain of events that would shake the entire airline. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken the moment Malik stood up. Every step he took made the stairs around him heavier. Some were evasive, as if trying to keep out of trouble. Some were sympathetic, but didn't dare speak. And some were cold, as if it made perfect sense. Malik put his hand on the small suitcase. He knew that if he let his emotions guide him, Harper didn't exactly hate Malik, but she carried with her an uneasy confidence, the confidence of someone who believed she was doing the right thing for the airline's standards. Malik looked into those eyes and understood that not all cruelty was born of malice. There was something more dangerous than malice in difference legitimized by procedure. Senator Grant Whitford adjusted his collar and took a half-step back to make way, as if to support a correct decision. His face no longer showed any sign of discomfort, only the satisfaction of someone who believed the familiar order was still being maintained. The security guards moved closer. One spoke in a monotone, trying to maintain the peace. "We just want to make sure the flight goes smoothly. Please cooperate." Malik saw confusion in his eyes, as if he, too, knew what was happening wasn't quite right. He walked slowly toward the back of the cabin. Each step brought back a memory. The times he was asked for extra screening at the airport despite his identity being verified. The moments when people asked him if he was really the CEO of HeartShield, the seemingly light but heart-wrenching jokes, all of these memories piled up like an endless row. A little boy clutching a basketball backpack watched Malik pass. His eyes were filled with confusion. Malik saw the small hand grip his mother's tighter. She leaned down, whispering something Malik couldn't quite make out, but he sensed something real in her eyes. A vague fear, a desire to protect her child from things adults didn't fully understand. As he reached row 23, the atmosphere became even more different. There was a smell of plastic, old fabric, and the dampness of passenger jackets. Malik placed his suitcase in the empty space near his feet and sat down in seat 23B. A male passenger next to him shifted to the right, as if Malik were taking up too much space despite his efforts to make himself as small as possible. Malik closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to steady his breathing. But the flight attendant's voice from above continued to echo down, keeping him from completely calming down. A young flight attendant, about 20 years old. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the tray of drinks for the passengers. She glanced at Malik briefly, then looked away. A patch of sky was dyed a dark shade like a veil of emotion. Malik realized that in this moment, he was not just filled with anger, but with loss. Disappointed to know that, despite trying to build a decent life, he can still be dragged down by the position of a chair. Disappointed to know that what happened to him was not just a mistake, and it was disappointing to see the look in people's eyes when they believed a black man didn't belong in the front row. The plane lifted off the ground. Malik heard the engines revving up. The sound usually made him feel open, but today it felt like a reminder that he was being pushed into a dark place in his memory, a place he thought he had long since escaped. A small voice suddenly rang out from beside him. "I apologize for what just happened." Malik looked into the man's eyes. There was a long silence. That small, simple word calmed Malik down a bit. He replied softly, "Thank you." The man said nothing more, just nodded slightly, but it was enough to remind Malik that in a world filled with invisible wounds, small kindnesses had the power to heal. Malik looked down at his hands. He noticed his knuckles were tenser than usual. He relaxed them, as a gesture to remind himself of what he needed to maintain composure. The plane stabilized at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers began pulling out laptops, opening books, or ordering drinks. No one mentioned what had just happened. No one mentioned the seat change. No one mentioned the passenger who had been pushed to the middle seat. A line of text appeared, and he typed slowly, each word echoing softly in his head. This needs to be considered, not for revenge, but to fix something that should have been fixed a long time ago. The plane continued to move forward through the thick clouds. A small plan began to form in Malik's mind, like the first seed of something larger. Cabin 23 quieted down as the plane reached cruising altitude. The lights dimmed, creating a feeling of a thin layer of mist covering the ceiling. Malik sat still. His shoulders slumped. He could hear the sound of someone turning a book, the plastic sound of a water tray, the whispers of children behind him. The sounds were ordinary, but to him they were. But out of a vague fear that speaking up would make her the next target, Malik understood that. He never blamed those who chose to remain silent. Not everyone had the strength to stand up in moments like that. A young waitress pushed a water cart past. She stopped for a moment in front of Malik's chair, bowing slightly. Her voice was low. "I'm sorry. I couldn't intervene. But I saw everything." She avoided direct eye contact, as if afraid of being caught on camera. Malik looked at her and replied softly, "Thank you for telling me." The words were few, but they surprised her, as if she couldn't believe that someone who had just suffered such mistreatment could still maintain this composure. Her eyes dropped into the hands holding the tray of water. She left, pushing the cart with a slight tremor in her hands. The tremor was not from fatigue, but from the pressure of a system that one could only endure, but not fix. A moment later, when the cabin was settled, Malik opened his phone. The note he had written earlier was still on the screen. He looked at it for a long moment, then put it back in his pocket. Instead of writing more, he closed his eyes. In the darkness behind those eyelids, memories poured out like a broken dam. He saw himself, years ago, standing at the door of a major technology conference. He was asked by the security guard to check his invitation again and again, because he couldn't believe a young black man was on the keynote. The sentence was meant as a compliment, but it also evoked something very heavy. He saw himself as a teenager, following his grandmother through unfamiliar streets. She held his hand tightly, teaching him how to keep his eyes calm in the face of people who looked at them as if they had wandered into a world not meant for them. The memories, one by one, emerged like shards of a tilted mirror. None of them was strong enough to break him. But as they came together, Malik realized why his heart had sunk so low when he was pushed out of 1A, not because of the chair, but because of what the chair represents. When he opened his eyes, the deep blue sky appeared through the small window. There were still fingerprints on the glass. Malik looked out at the horizon as if searching. He was sitting close to the aisle, his round dark eyes watching him curiously, a little afraid, but more than that, genuinely concerned. He smiled. "I'm fine." The boy continued, "I think adults don't talk to you very well." Malik held his smile a beat longer to reassure the boy. "Grown-ups misbehave sometimes. It's not your fault." The boy nodded, closing the story with a soft breath. The mother whispered an apology with her eyes. Malik just nodded, not wanting to embarrass her. That small act softened a part of Malik's heart. Kindness, no matter how small, can soften the roughest parts of a person's heart. The plane rocked slightly as it passed through a gust of wind. Malik put his hands on the seat in front. His eyes swept over Malik as if he were responsible for the delay, even though he had done nothing more than sit in his seat. Harper didn't say anything, but there was obvious discomfort in his gaze, the kind of discomfort that comes from someone who is afraid of being judged wrongly by their superiors. So they find someone weaker to blame. Malik didn't avoid the gaze. He returned it with a look so calm it made Harper look away first. No challenge, no anger, just the presence of someone who knew he had done no wrong. As Harper left, someone in the back row let out a soft sigh, as if relieved that the heavy atmosphere had temporarily subsided. Malik turned back to the window, letting the thin light from outside wash over his face. He felt something building in, and the truth never needs to be shouted. A ping sounded. The plane's communication system signaled a new announcement. Before he could hear the content, Malik knew from the feeling in his chest that something was about to unfold. He took a deep breath. The only thought in his mind was a smoldering sentence. No one should be treated like this. No one. The plane hurtled forward. No one on board could have imagined that this incident, which seemed like a minor incident during a flight, would unleash a secret network deep within the Liberty air system. And Malik, who is sitting in seat 23B, will be at the center of it. The next ping sounded as soft as a knock on a closed door. Malik looked up reflexively, but no announcement came. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, not peace, but like the moment before a door opens. Footsteps crept along the aisle. This time, it wasn't Harper. Malik tilted his head slightly as he saw a young flight attendant walking very slowly, almost deliberately slowing down to avoid being noticed. She stopped right next to his seat, a metal water bottle in her hand. Her face still had the same confusion from before, but there was something else in her eyes. Courage. She placed the plastic cup on the folding table in front of him and said in a low voice, "Mr. Hart, I have something to say in private." Malik looked up and nodded slightly. The young woman glanced toward the front of the compartment, making sure Harper wasn't looking. Then she leaned forward, still pretending to pour water. In that position, she spoke in a shaky, but she continued, "It's not just passengers of color. Some people get their seats moved because they don't look classy enough. Some people are not regulars of their superiors. They have an internal chat group. The way they talk is terrible. Many of the crew know, but they don't dare to protest." Malik looked into her eyes, a fear so deep inside her that she could barely stay there for more than a few seconds. But Malik realized she was trying to do something many others would choose to avoid. "Thank you," Malik said softly. "What is your name?" Her eyes flickered, as if considering the risk of revealing her name. Finally, with a determined breath, she answered, "Saya Brooks." Malik nodded slightly, his eyes stern but kind. "You have been braver than many." Saya pursed her lips as if those words calmed her down. She stood up straight, "But you are the first whose identity they fear." Malik was stunned. Each word lingered in his mind like the last layer of dew before the sun rose, not because he was the CEO, but because what they had been doing all along was suddenly no longer concealable. He placed his hands on the folding table. The cold plastic felt more sobering. Malik realized that what Saya said was important not just to him, but to others who had been treated the same way and had no chance to speak up. There was a murmur in the back seat. Did she just talk to him? Then silence. No one wanted to be dragged into it. Malik glanced up at the aisle ahead. Harper was talking to an elderly passenger, but his eyes kept darting toward row 23 as if Malik. The captain's voice was calm, no different from any other regular flight. But for Malik, everything on this flight was unfamiliar. He leaned his head back in his chair, letting his thoughts drift to the spots of light outside the window. He thought of Hartshield. He thought of Marcus, probably confused by his schedule being messed up. He thought of Grandma Elaine, who had told him that some battles don't choose you, but you are chosen because you are strong enough to stand in them. Malik sighed, not the sigh of a tired man, but of a man who understood that a door had opened, and he would have to enter, whether he wanted to or not, when the cabin steward announced that water was ready for a second serving. In the front row, the curly-haired woman suddenly turned around and whispered softly, I saw what they did. If you need a witness, I can help." She immediately turned away, as if afraid someone would see her. A warm feeling spread through Malik. He was not alone. He was not the only one who knew what was wrong. They were just waiting for someone stronger to step up. Malik looked back at his phone screen. He opened the Notes app and wrote a few words: Saya Brooks, witness, sequence of events before and after removal, Senator Whitford, words, attitude, Chief Steward Harper, imposed decision, system flawed, not the fault of one person. Each line seemed to draw a web, and Malik knew that the web was not thin. The voice of the man sitting next to him pulled Malik out of his thoughts. "Are you going to? I hope you will. Because if you don't, who will?" The words were small, but they struck a chord deep within Malik. He was more than a victim of being relegated to a chair. He had a voice that many others lacked. The cabin shook again, harder this time. The pilot announced a gust of wind. Malik held onto the armrest, but his mind steadied. He looked out the window. The sky was wide open, but covered with thick clouds that hid something beneath. In his heart, a final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. If what Saya said was true, if there was a discriminatory chat group in the internal system, if many people had their seats moved without anyone knowing, then today's incident was not an accident. And when the truth is told at the right time, it can shake a plane without shouting. The wings banked and angled. Under the thick cloud cover, Denver was reduced to a dim speck. Meanwhile, inside cabin 23B, a new, clearer stream began to flow. It is not the water of sadness. It is the water of change. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin with a gentle vibration. Malik sat still, his hands on his lap, his thumb unconsciously touching the edge of his phone in his pocket. Not to open it, but to maintain a still point. He had heard many words on this flight, but Saya Brooks's words rang louder in his head. "You are not the first." A simple sentence, but enough to make Malik feel a cold streak run deep into his heart. Both possibilities were suspicious. Malik adjusted his back slightly to sit up straighter. The upright posture made him feel as if he were in an important meeting, even though he was facing not a high-level security council, but the unspoken truth. Behind compartment 23 there was a sudden rustling of plastic bags. An older man pulled out his headphones and placed them on his ears, but didn't turn them on. He tilted his head slightly toward Malik, as if to hear what else had happened. Malik guessed he knew what had happened, but like many others, he would keep quiet. Malik didn't blame him for the silence, but he could tell that his fear had its weight. Suddenly, in the cabin light, her face looked like she was struggling between wanting to speak and being afraid of being overheard. She continued, her voice low but sincere. "I am a frequent flyer on Liberty Air. I know Senator Whitford. He has a habit of being pampered. And this crew, they always do that to powerful people." Her eyes trembled slightly, but they have never done it so blatantly in front of so many people. Malik nodded slightly. "Thank you." The woman pursed her lips. "If my testimony is required, I am ready. I have kept silent in many situations. This time, I do not intend to do so." Her words softened Malik's heart, not because she would be a witness, but because someone was willing to step over her fear to choose what was right. But the eyes of people who wanted to see where this story would lead, even though they did not dare to interfere. Compartment 23 is like a box containing dozens of hearts beating with the same emotional rhythm, but locked in silence. Malik placed his hands on the front seat, leaning forward slightly. As he did so, his thoughts became clearer. He did not seek war, but he could not let the truth be obscured as it had been. A pale blue figure appeared in sight again. This time it was Saya Brooks who returned. She pretended to adjust the drink tray in the back seat, then approached Malik. She didn't stop, just walked past, but her words were so soft that only he could hear them. The cabin crew chief, Say, continued, "I think you should know. They are protecting each other." Malik inclined his head slightly. "And you?" Saya paused for half a second before answering. "I was just trying to be honest. But..." She bowed her head. "I was afraid of losing my job." That statement made one thing very clear to Malik: the silence of employees like Saya was not complicity. It was survival in an environment where wrongdoing was shielded by rank and connection. Malik replied in a very small voice, "You have done more than you think." Saya stepped back, continuing her work as if the conversation had never happened. Malik noticed her hands were still shaking slightly, but her steps were steadier than before. A strong feeling rose within Malik. He was awakened, but before he wrote, he paused, tilting his head back to stare into space. Those small voices, those unspoken apologies, those averted eyes filled with frustration, and the silent fear running through the hearts of people like Saya. It all adds up to a very real soundtrack. A soundtrack that, if you listen closely, sounds like the sound of a system rotting from within. Malik writes Liberty Air, not personal, systemic. Saya needs to be protected. Witnesses needed. Don't react with anger. Use facts. He stopped writing. He closed his eyes. In that moment, Malik could hear his heart beating slowly but clearly. Each beat was a reminder of a path he had never wanted to take, but now had to. A man from the back row came forward and approached Malik's chair. Malik looked straight at the man. His eyes grew warmer. "Thank you." The man nodded and leaned back in his chair. No one else paid attention to the exchange, but to Malik, it was the first important piece of the puzzle. The cabin shook slightly again, and the pilot announced that he was preparing to descend. Malik picked up his glass of water and took a small sip. The cold water touched his throat, making him feel every movement in his heart. The window beside him reflected his face, not the face of a humiliated man, but the face of a man standing before something greater than himself. He touched the glass lightly, watching the bright patches of the distant earth gradually appear under the clouds. Malik understood. Every little word on this flight had opened a big door. A new chapter of this story awaits you just below that cloud. The moment the wheels touched the ground, there was a soft bounce, followed by a deep roar as the drag reversed. The flight slowed. The cabin lights brightened a little. Many passengers straightened up, as if waking from a long dream. Malik opened his eyes. He looked through the small window where sunlight slanted in, a thin strip of light cutting across his hand. The strip of light was like a cross between two worlds, one in the air, where the truth was beginning to emerge, and one below ground where he had to descend and face the consequences. A rare sense of calm settled in his heart, not because everything was resolved, but because he knew he was no longer alone. The click of seatbelt from the row above, the curly-haired woman turned back once more. This time she spoke more clearly, not in a whisper, as before. "I have taken note of what you said. I will testify if necessary." Malik nodded, his expression somber, but his eyes bright. "I appreciate that." She smiled, then joined the crowd that was gradually moving towards the exit. An older man at the back of the compartment approached Malik, stopping just a foot ahead. "I don't know what you're going to do next," he said hoarsely but kindly, "but if you want to lift this curtain, you have people on your side." Malik responded with a calm nod. He said nothing more, but the man's presence was enough to make Malik feel that this was no longer. She was small in the crowd, but she carried a quiet strength that Malik believed he would remember years from now. Harper Lane stood near the door. Her expression was calm, but a little tense. Harper didn't look at Malik right away. Only when Malik walked up did Harper speak professionally, as if nothing had happened. "Have a nice day." The voice was stiff, cold, and empty. Malik paused for half a second. He did not respond to the greeting. He just kept his eyes straight, low, and very calm. In that moment, Harper lost her composure. Something in Malik's eyes made Harper lower her head, just a little. No one noticed. But Malik knew the fear of the wrongdoer always exists before the calm of the victim. Malik walked out the door. Malik walked slowly, his suitcase rolling softly across the floor. In his mind, images of each face on the plane flashed through his mind. Each face held a piece of the truth: fear, guilt, helplessness, courage, and indifference. Malik breathed slowly, letting his breath pass through the emotions without getting caught up in them. He stopped in front of a large information board, not to get directions, but to stand still and get the distinct feeling that he was entering the most important part of the story. A text message rang. Malik took out his phone. It was from Marcus Hall. "Are you here yet? Security is waiting to confirm your schedule. Any problems?" Malik looked at the text, then slowly typed it back. "I'll go into details later." He put the phone back in his pocket. Every word Marcus sent, every reply he received, made Malik realize that a choice could no longer be reversed. He walked to the empty window seat. He sat down, put his suitcase beside him, and looked out at the runway. Another plane had just landed, its tires trailing white smoke. Malik felt his heart sink, but not heavy. In that moment of silence, he remembered his grandmother, Elaine Hart, with her thin, strong hands. How she had taught him that justice does not come by itself. It comes from standing tall when all around him wants to bend him. Malik touched his chest gently, where his breathing evened out. "Grandma," he said to himself, "I understand something else today, and I want you to know, things like this should not be overlooked again." Malik stood up. Their eyes met in a wordless understanding. "Thank you," Malik said. "Not everyone dares to say that." She shook her head slightly. "There are things, if I don't say them, I'll feel like I'm shrinking." Then she left, her figure fading into the crowd of people in the station. But Malik knew she had left an important piece of this journey behind. He looked at his palm. The lines had not changed, but the idea he held in his hand was different from when the plane landed. What he held now was responsibility and truth. Malik took out his phone. He opened his email folder, created a new email. To Liberty Air Internal Investigations, Subject line, he pulled the suitcase, stood up, and walked. Not fast, not slow, but very sure. The station opened wide before him. The light from the polished floor seemed to reflect the journey he was about to embark on. A journey where what happens on the flight is just the surface. The central lobby of the arrivals terminal was spacious, the white light reflecting off the polished tile floor giving it a clean yet cold feel. Malik walked through the crowd, each step steady, not hurried but with a concentration that was immediately noticeable. He felt like the air was thicker, not because it was crowded, but because he knew that outside the plane there was more than just the noise of passengers. There were curious looks and hands, but he knew clearly that facing the crew was only the surface. What lay beyond was truly terrifying. He walked toward the baggage area. Overhead, a large screen continuously displayed the flight list. 2 automatic doors opened, and the distinctive smell of baggage handling wafted out with the stream of people. Malik stood by conveyor belt number 5, waiting for his familiar suitcase to appear. The sound of wheels clanking against metal echoed. A gray suitcase rolled forward, then a red one. Malik had not yet seen his. He folded his arms across his chest, his eyes scanning the faces around him, trying to hear any conversation. A group of 2 young men looked at their phone screens. Part of him felt it was good, because the truth needed to come out. Part of him knew it would have consequences he couldn't control. Just as he was thinking, the phone in his pocket vibrated. It was from Marcus Hall Malik. "I saw the video. It's going viral. Are you okay?" Malik read, thought for a few seconds, then pressed reply. "I'm fine. Don't call anyone yet. I need to check a few things first." He put the phone away and exhaled slowly. His face was expressionless, but a heavier feeling had appeared in his heart. Not fear, but a greater responsibility. The conveyor belt continued to turn. Malik's suitcase appeared behind a navy one. He walked over and pulled it down gently. His hand touched the handle, the familiar feeling bringing. Saya stood far enough away from Malik to avoid being noticed. She said softly. The cabin chief called to report. "They are trying to write a report blaming you," Malik asked softly. "Did you see what they wrote?" Saya nodded. "They said you were loud. They said you were disturbing the safety of the flight. They even added that you refused to follow instructions." Malik closed his eyes for half a second. That was not difficult to predict. Saya continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I think you need to know more. They are requiring the crew members to sign that statement." Malik opened his eyes and looked straight at her. "Have you signed?" Saya shook her head. "I didn't sign. I told them I needed time to review the matter. But if I didn't sign..." Saya was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, as if relieved, "I know I'm not as strong as you think. I just can't bear to hide the truth." Malik smiled slightly. "That's strong enough." Saya's eyes narrowed. She looked around, making sure no one was watching. "I have one more thing to tell you. Before the plane left Atlanta, I overheard ground control talking about Senator Whitford, that he had asked Liberty Air to delay the technical report for the flight to avoid a delay, which means she did not dare to say it all." Malik continued, low and slow. "It means they are willing to ignore safety standards for an individual in power." Saya swallowed. "I can't be sure, since I only heard a few sentences, but it makes me feel very uneasy." Malik watched her until she disappeared behind the pillar. He stood motionless for a few heartbeats. One truth after another emerged, and what Malik feared most became clear. It's not just discrimination. It's not just abuse of power by the flight crew. It could be a safety issue for hundreds of people. Malik walked slowly toward the parking lot. The breeze from the automatic doors made the hem of his coat flutter. His thoughts grew deeper and heavier. As he reached the parking lot, a man's voice called out, "Dr. Hart." Malik turned. It was the older man on the plane who had said he would support him. He ran over, took a deep breath, and opened the phone in his hand. "I'm sending you the video I took. I didn't get the whole thing, but it's enough to see them pushing you from." Malik looked at the phone in his hand. The screen showed a short video, a little shaky from the hasty angle, but every second contained a clear truth. Nothing Malik had done was dangerous, only the arrogance of others. He saved the video in a private folder. He looked around the large parking lot. The air from the station's air conditioning ducts mixed with the air, making everything smell like smoke. Malik pulled his suitcase toward Marcus's car, which had been arranged in advance. His mind stopped reeling. It was clear. What he had to do next was no longer a choice. It was the right thing. Malik opened the car door and got into the back seat. He put his suitcase aside, leaned back slightly, and closed his eyes. He spoke very softly, as if reminding himself, it really begins now. The car pulled out of the parking lot, weaving through a line of taxis and service vehicles waiting to pick up passengers. Outside the window, the busy street formed an endless string of lights. Malik sat in the back seat, his left hand resting on his knee, his right hand gently smoothing the folds of his suitcase as if touching something much more important. In the quiet cabin, the only sound was the sound of the engine and the steady glow of streetlights that brushed his face. Malik stared straight ahead, not really looking at the road. His mind was on another path, deeper and more winding. The driver turned around and said politely, "Mr. Hart, shall I take you to the hotel you have booked?" Malik shook his head. The meeting he had in mind had not been part of his original plan, but after what had happened on the flight and in the airport, he knew he had to do it. Things were moving too fast. He needed to lead, not follow. The car turned onto a major avenue. Above, the West Line Tower stood tall, a towering mass of black steel. The glass windows reflected the street below, creating a picture that was half real and half unreal. When the car stopped, Malik opened the door and stepped out. The wind from the river blew through his coat, carrying with it the smell of steam and the hushed sounds of the city. He pulled his suitcase along and entered the main lobby. The lobby was large, the ceiling high, the light soft as the color of the receptionist checked, then nodded. "Please come up to the 27th floor, conference room number 3. Malik thanked him and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, the narrow space made his breathing more audible. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, reminding himself that his next steps would require absolute precision. The elevator stopped. Malik walked down the long, quiet hallway, his footsteps echoing in the distance. The door to conference room number 3 was ajar, and warm light streamed out from inside. Evelyn Ross waited. She was an independent legal counsel with years of experience in civil rights, and the person Malik trusted when he needed the most candid advice. Evelyn smiled slightly when she saw him. Evelyn opened her laptop and placed it in front of Malik. "Tell me everything in order. I'll write it down, then we'll see how serious it is." Malik told the story, unvarnished, unaltered. Every detail, every word the crew said, every look, every moment he was forced out of seat 2A, then the conversation with Saya in the cabin. Evelyn listened with absolute concentration. Her face showed little emotion, but her eyes grew sharper with each passage. Malik added about Saya's whispering at the baggage claim, about the false report, about forcing the crew to sign a falsified report. When he finished, Evelyn rubbed her hands together, her fingers clasped. "This is no longer about discrimination. It is about systemic abuse of power." Malik nodded. He knew that. But hearing, "I don't want to hit anyone. I just want the truth." Evelyn shook her head slightly. "It can't be helped." Malik, when the truth is too great, it always hits those who try to cover it up. Malik said nothing. He just stared out the glass doors behind Evelyn. The city below was moving like a stream of light. In it, he realized one thing clearly: he had entered a battle from which there was no turning back. Evelyn pulled a thick sheaf of papers from her briefcase. These are the official reporting channels: Department of Transportation, FAA, and TSA. But I want you to consider one more thing. Malik looked up. You should meet with a few representatives of Liberty Air before submitting any documents. If they want to cover up, we need to know the extent. I believe they fear more than they want to cooperate. And when an organization is afraid, it is prone to mistakes. We can use that. Malik didn't like the word, but he understood Evelyn's meaning. So, when do we start? Evelyn closed her laptop. Tonight. Malik breathed slowly. His cloak bulged slightly around his shoulders as he sat back in his chair, as if carrying a new weight. He said softly but firmly, I will go all the way. Evelyn stood up, put her hand on Malik's shoulder, and squeezed gently. And I will go with you, step by step. In that moment, the loneliness that Malik had been silently carrying since being dragged from seat 2A suddenly faded. Not disappeared, but was shared. The two of them gathered their documents and left the conference. There will be a counterattack. Malik looked straight into the elevator mirror, where his face was reflected in the white light. I know. His voice was low, not angry, but like the affirmation of someone who had chosen a path of no return. I'm ready. The elevator opened. They stepped into the lobby. Malik pulled his suitcase. Evelyn walked beside him. Outside was the city night, its lights scattered everywhere like countless eyes watching. Malik understood that well, but this time he no longer felt alone among the countless gazes. The large glass doors of Westline Tower slid shut behind Malik and Evelyn. Outside, the city lights stretched out like a never-ending road. Malik felt the wind blow past him, carrying the distinctly eastern chill. He took a slow breath, letting the night air. We're going to Liberty Air headquarters, she said softly, like someone reading a story that already knew the ending. Malik didn't ask any more questions. He got in and sat up straight, Evelyn sitting beside him. The car rolled through the orange-yellow streets. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It wasn't an awkward silence, but rather an inner preparation for a conversation they both knew wouldn't be easy. Malik looked out the window. Outside were buildings piled high, each window a different story. He suddenly remembered what his grandmother Elaine had said when he was a child. When you're faced with people who don't want to hear the truth, you have to tell it in a way that they can't ignore. He nodded slightly, as if in reply to something. Evelyn, you think they will deny everything? Evelyn pursed her lips. I think they'll try to spin it. They'll say you misunderstood. They'll say the crew was just following protocol. They'll distract you. Malik was silent. Evelyn added, but you are not weak. We have enough to force them to back down. The car stopped in front of the Liberty Air headquarters building. The company logo glowed brightly against the blue glass. Compared to the quiet Westline Tower, this place felt like a giant stage, ready to change at the whim of the operator. Malik stepped out of the car. The light from the sign caught his jacket, creating a faint reflection across the fabric. The security gate opened with a soft, almost inaudible sound. A staff member led them into a closed conference room on the top floor. The conference room. Malik recognized one of them immediately, Richard Coleman, Liberty Air's Vice President of Operations. His face was cold, his gaze unreadable. A woman sat next to Coleman, trim and tense. Evelyn whispered in Malik's ear, "That's Marcia Heller, the HR director." Malik took a seat across from them. Evelyn sat beside him. The door closed, cutting off the noise of the hallway. Coleman spoke in a carefully composed tone. "Dr. Hart, thank you for coming. We were told you wanted to clarify the incident on our flight. Malik looked straight at him. I want to be clear, but it wasn't just one incident. It was the entire system that allowed it to happen. Heller interrupted, trying to keep his voice even. We received a report from the flight crew. They said. Coleman crossed his arms. You must understand that sometimes reservation systems make mistakes. Mr. Whitford is a frequent flyer. Priority Malik interrupted, his voice low but strong. I understand your point perfectly. And I hope you understand this. A regular passenger has no right to take away another person's seat, especially if the sole reason is the color of his skin. A thin layer of static hung in the air. Heller pursed his lips, and Coleman looked down at the table for a moment. Evelyn opened her computer and turned the screen toward them. Here's a video from a passenger. There was no obvious disruptive behavior. There was obvious bias by the crew. We have more footage, and a crew. Heller immediately stood up. I deny that. We have proof, Evelyn replied in a breathy voice. Heller sat down, unable to hide his confusion. Malik leaned forward, his voice low, slow and heavy. More than one person saw what happened on that flight. Many people. And yet you still think you can cover it up with a false report. Coleman remained silent for a few seconds, then said, Dr. Hart, what do you want? Malik looked him straight in the eye. I want the truth to come out. I want those who abused power to be held accountable. And I want Liberty Air to end the system that allowed this. Coleman leaned back in his chair. Those things can't be resolved in a closed meeting. Then we'll do it in public, Malik replied. That sentence made the space in the room sink as if something had just. The matter involving Whitford is not simple. We cannot let the company fall into crisis just because of a personal misunderstanding. Malik stood up. If they can make the company go bankrupt, it's not my problem. Evelyn also stood up. We will send the official documents later. Please have your answers ready. No one in the room said anything more. Malik gathered his suitcase and walked out the door. The air outside felt lighter as the door closed. On the way out to the lobby, Evelyn said, You see, they're scared, but they're also trying to turn things around. Malik looked straight ahead. So much the better. I want them to know they won't be able to hide the truth much longer. His footsteps echoed softly on the stone floor. The light of Malik and Evelyn stepped out into the open courtyard. The air carried a chill, pushing away the warmth of their footsteps. The yellow light from the decorative lights reflected off the pavement, creating the illusion of sparkling streams of water flowing beneath their feet. The black sedan was waiting. Malik opened the door, but before he stepped in, he paused, looking straight at the glass-fronted building behind him. Malik had a clear sense that this was more than just an aviation facility. It was like a large fortress, with many layers, many corridors, many secrets, and many people accustomed to thinking that power was an impenetrable wall. Evelyn opened the back door and slid into the seat beside him. Are you okay? She asked, her voice low, but her eyes filled with understanding. The next step isn't just a conversation. It's about preparing for Whitford's counterattack. Malik looked at her, straight and clear. I know, and I am ready. The car pulled onto the main road. The traffic was still heavy, the headlights of SUVs and sedans weaving in and out in a wavering light. Inside. Malik closed his eyes for a moment, but there was no fatigue in him, only a sense of organization, as if his mind were putting information into place for the inevitable confrontation. Marcus Hall called. Malik opened his eyes, looked at the screen, then answered. Marcus, it's me. Marcus's voice was filled with concern. Malik, what have you been doing at Liberty Air? There's an inside story leaking out. There's talk of a backlash. Whitford is Marcus was silent for a few seconds. I trust you. But be careful. Malik hung up. Putting the phone down, he looked out the window. Evelyn, he said softly, I want to see Saya tonight. Evelyn nodded. You mean to verify what she heard at the airport? Yes. And to see how far I can go without putting her in danger. The car turned off, the GPS taking them to the dormitory area for a flight crew to rest. The building was light gray, of moderate height, with hallway lights filtering in from the windows, making the place seem to breathe. Malik stepped out of the car, his suitcase sliding across the cobblestones. Evelyn walked beside him. They entered the second-floor hallway where Saya Brooks was. The door to the room opened when Evelyn knocked. Hart. I didn't think you'd come all the way here, Saya said softly. I came to thank you, Malik replied, and to ask something very important. Saya avoided their eyes for a moment, then invited them in. The room was small and simple, with a low wooden table, a single chair, and a neat bed. Malik sat down, Evelyn leaning lightly against the sill. Saya held the glass of water, but her hand was shaking. Malik watched her tremble, not from fear of him, but from the pressure of the truth. Are you sure what you heard about Whitford's request is correct? Malik asked. Saya took a deep breath, then looked up. I didn't hear everything, but they clearly said that the technical report had to be ignored because Whitford's. Saya continued. I don't know if it's related to a bigger problem, but I've long felt that the company indulges Whitford too much. The engineering team once joked that if he frowns, the system will forgive minor errors. Malik looked up. There are no small mistakes in aviation. Saya nodded, her eyes red. I know, and that makes me uneasy, because not only do they not respect passengers like you, but sometimes I think they don't respect safety either. The words made Malik step back, not out of surprise, but because he knew he had just received the most dangerous piece of the puzzle. Malik looked at Saya for a long time, his voice warming. I will protect you. Saya bowed her head. I'm not afraid of losing my job, I'm just afraid. But because she was able to release what she had kept inside for so long, Evelyn stepped forward, handing Saya a tissue. You won't be going through this alone. We won't let them isolate you. Saya wiped her tears, then smiled weakly. Thank you. Really thank you. When Malik left the room, he stood in the hallway for a few seconds. He leaned against the railing and looked out at the space below. The streaks of light from the other rooms made it seem as if countless stories were being written simultaneously in the night. Evelyn stood beside him, arms crossed. You see, they're in deep, and people like Saya get caught up in it with no one to protect them. Malik nodded, his voice slow and low. I know what I have to do. What are you going to do first? Evelyn smiled faintly, a little tiredly. And you will hit that weak spot. Malik did not answer immediately. He took a deep breath. I will hit them where they least expect it, he finally said. The truth. They left the hallway and walked back to the car. The sky above was as still as a dark silk, but Malik knew very well the silence before the storm was always the most important moment. And as he walked down the last steps to the parking lot, his heart rate slowed, but the force inside him intensified. He chose this path, even though it was long, full of sharp rocks, even though no one could guarantee him anything. But he still walked, because he believed that if no one spoke up, the wrong things would remain. And tonight, amid the misty silence, Malik knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow will be different. The black sedan left the staff quarters. The road curved gently down to the downtown area. Not the rhythm of anxiety, but the rhythm of someone making arrangements. Evelyn looked at Malik through the frosted glass that reflected his reflection. I know you have something else on your mind, she whispered. Malik made no attempt to hide it. I need another meeting, this time with the Ministry of Transportation. Evelyn turned around, her eyes thoughtful. They will demand proof, and the proof must be irreversible. Malik looked straight ahead. I have the truth. I just need them to hear it. The car pulled into a side street where Malik's hotel ended. When the car stopped, Malik stood before the large glass doors, the light from inside casting a soft shadow on his face. He stepped into the lobby. The space was quiet. The room was spacious, with a solid feel to it, and the muted colors. Malik put down his suitcase and stood in front of the large window. The city stretched out below, 1,000 dots of light like little stories unfolding at the same time. He breathed slowly. His mind flashed with images of Saya squeezing the tissue with slightly trembling hands, of the old man handing over the video, of the curly-haired woman saying she would testify, and of Grant Whitford sitting coldly in seat 2A as if the whole sky belonged to him. Almost immediately, the answer echoed in his mind. Go all the way. Malik reached for his phone, scrolled through his contacts. His fingers stopped on Marcus Hall. He called. Marcus picked up after only 2 rings. Malik, are you back in your room? I was worried. Malik said clearly, I want to see a representative of the Ministry of Transport. The sooner the better. Marcus was silent for a few seconds as if he was gathering his thoughts. Are you sure? If you go this far, there will be no turning back. Whitford will use all his connections to attack you. Malik leaned lightly against the table, his voice as firm as a rock. If I don't, people like Saya will continue to live in fear. Innocent people will be pushed from their seats. And worse. But Malik, prepare yourself, because this is going to be a big one. Malik smiled slightly. I am always prepared. He hung up, put the phone on the table, and closed his eyes for a few seconds. It was a brief moment of silence, but it gave him some inner strength. He opened his eyes. The next step was to send the documents to Evelyn for review. Malik opened his suitcase and took out the small file containing video transcripts, depositions, and notes he'd taken during the trip. He laid each item out on the table, arranging them in a clear order. There was a soft knock on the door. Malik went to open it. Evelyn stood there, holding a laptop and a briefcase. You think I'll let you do it alone? She gave a tired but determined smile. Their faces were focused, as if they were assembling pieces of a larger puzzle. I want them to see everything, Malik said. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. And they will have to, because when you stand up, they can't turn off the light. They worked without interruption for nearly an hour. The silence in the room was filled with the soft sounds of papers turning and the steady tapping of keyboards. Malik had the distinct feeling that each passing minute brought him closer to a vortex larger than himself. But he didn't feel anxious. It felt right. When he finished the first draft, Malik leaned back in his chair and caught his breath. Evelyn paused and looked at him, her eyes softening. Are you tired? Malik shook his head. I've been tired a lot in my life, but this is... While Malik was arranging the papers in a folder, Evelyn suddenly asked Malik, why don't you just let it go? You're successful enough that you don't need to get involved in this. You can just get on another flight and forget about it. Malik paused, his hand on the clipboard. He looked out the window. The darkness outside reflected his own face in the glass. Finally he spoke, his voice slow and filled with a sincerity he rarely showed. I can't bear to see other people treated the way I was treated. When I was a child, my grandmother used to walk me past the bus stop where I was pushed off my seat without anyone asking why. I told myself that when I grew up, if I could spare someone from seeing that pain, I would. Evelyn placed a hand lightly on his arm. So this is more than just justice. The meeting with the Ministry of Transport is tomorrow morning. Malik put down the phone, his eyes changing. He sat up straight. Tomorrow starts for real. Evelyn looked at him, nodding as if confirming his statement. Malik stood and walked to the window. The city below him shimmered like a sea of light. Each dot of light seemed like a pair of eyes watching. He pressed his hand to the cold glass. Tomorrow. He would force Liberty Air to face what they were trying to cover up. Tomorrow. He would call the truth by its name. And tomorrow, he would begin the hardest part of the journey. That morning, the city seemed to be quiet before it moved. From the wide glass window of his hotel room, Malik looked down at the gently moving. Malik stood before the mirror, adjusted his collar, and took a deep breath. Not to reassure himself, but to remind himself that today was more than just a meeting. This was where the truth would be laid on the table, as it was meant to be. There was a knock on the door. Evelyn entered, holding the last of the files. Her face was filled with concentration. "They've confirmed the meeting time. We have 10 minutes to get to the Ministry of Transport," she said. Malik nodded slightly. "Let's go." The moment they stepped out of the hotel, the air outside seemed cooler. Malik felt the wind on his face, bringing with it a strange sense of alertness. A black sedan was waiting. The driver opened the door. Malik and Evelyn got inside. The car moved through the streets, but he knew that whatever the outcome, he had arrived at the right place. When the car stopped in front of the Ministry of Transport, Malik got out and adjusted his jacket. The grounds were spacious. The steps leading up to the main entrance were made of light-colored stone. Above, the agency's emblem was neatly mounted, giving the impression of a solid legal system. Inside the lobby, a concierge led them to the 3rd floor. A large conference room, glass doors, black leather chairs, and a long, wide table. A group of 4 people awaited them. The man at the head of the table stood as Malik entered. "I'm Andrew Lewis, from the Transportation Safety Board." He introduced himself. His voice was low, each word decisive. Malik shook hands. Malik nodded, recounting every detail. Nothing left out, nothing embellished, just the pure truth. Every incident on the flight, the crew's behavior, the favoritism toward Whitford, and even the conversation with Saya Brooks at the airport. Malik didn't mention Saya by name to protect her, but he clearly described the truth. When he got to the part about Liberty Air asking the crew to sign a false report, the room fell silent. Lewis leaned forward slightly, as if to confirm if he had heard correctly. "Do you have proof?" Lewis asked. Evelyn slid the small USB stick forward. All the audio and video recordings, plus statements from the passengers and staff involved. "We're only handing over copies. The originals remain confidential," Malik replied, his voice quiet but firm. "That's what I came here for." Another committee member asked, "Dr. Hart, I want to know what you want from the investigation." "Compensation." "An apology." "A full investigation." Malik leaned back slightly, his eyes on the table for a few seconds before answering. "I didn't come here to apologize. I came here for change. An apology can't erase the way so many people like me were treated as if they weren't worthy. A compensation can't erase what Saya was afraid to tell." He looked up, his eyes brighter than usual. "I want Liberty Air to change, from the processes to the people, and I want every passenger to be protected as they are." Lewis squeezed the pen in his hand. They watched the videos and took notes on each item. No one in the room ignored or interrupted Malik. Each piece of evidence was laid out on the table like a mirror, reflecting the truth that Liberty Air had tried to cover up. At the end of the session, Lewis stood up. "I pledge to open a formal investigation, and Liberty Air will have to answer every question." Malik nodded slightly. "Thank you." They left the conference room. As they walked down the hallway, Malik felt the tension in the air lighten, not because the outcome was certain, but because he knew he had reached the part of the room he needed to go. Evelyn touched his arm lightly. "Malik, you just did what many would never dream of." Malik smiled. "I don't do it alone." They stepped outside. The driver opened the door. Malik was about to get in when his phone rang. A text from Marcus Malik. "Breaking news. Liberty Air called an emergency press conference. They want to explain. I think they're going to make something public." Malik looked at the screen for a few seconds. Evelyn asked, "What news?" Malik showed her the message. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "They're panicking. They want to get ahead of themselves to save face." Malik chuckled softly, his voice soft as if talking to himself. "Let them do what they must." He got into the car, but before closing the door, he looked back at the Ministry of Transport building standing tall behind him. In that moment, Malik felt what he had been waiting for his entire life. A small, and for those who have been silent for too long. Malik closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. His voice was low, but full of emotion. Let the truth have its way. The car rolled away, taking him away from there. But his story, Saya's story, and the story of hundreds of people who have suffered injustice, will not stop. For once the light shines on the truth, darkness can no longer cover it. Malik Hart's story reminds us of a simple truth that we sometimes forget in our busy lives. Dignity is not something someone gives us. It is something we must maintain every day, especially in our most challenging moments. We don't all walk into a boardroom with the power of a CEO, but we all have moments when we need to stand up for. He wanted to make things right, and that choice paved the way for hundreds of others to be treated better. The lesson here is very real, very real. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need power to have influence. Just don't lose your self-respect, and, when possible, use your experience to help someone reduce a pain you once carried. If this story made you think, if it made you see a part of yourself in it, I would like to sincerely thank you for staying until the end. Please take a second to like,